think of any other word to say with Mike and Sylvia. The teaching has just flowed out, and I don't think the dam's run dry yet. And I'm sure if we had him here for another 3 weeks, it would still keep pouring out, because he has a great depth and width of knowledge of the scriptures, and a lot of experience in teaching, both in the ordinary education field as well as in the religious field, if that's not a good word, but you know what I mean. And over the last 12 to 18 months or so that we have been planning for the visit, the thermometer of excitement's been getting higher and higher, and finally they arrived. We had a great weekend last weekend. It'll take us a long time to digest all that we heard, but we're looking forward today. And so, Mike, without any further ado, with great thanks to the Lord for your being here, we welcome you, and we're just waiting to hear what you have to say. Would you like to?
I'm glad you sung Wide as the Ocean. It's one of my favourites, and every month I take a service in the Episcopalian or Anglican church in our village. It's a family service, and I've been doing it now for about 5 years. And every January 1, that's the song I always start off with at the beginning of every year, is Wide as the Ocean, Jesus loves me, this I know. And family service is great because the kids come up in front and do the actions. But one of the things I say is very much as Athol said there, this is not a children's song. Because we teach children it, and then when we get older, we start losing confidence that God loves us, don't we? Adults lose confidence in his love. Because we're sinners, and we know we're sinners, but the fact is he's our Father, and he loves us. So thank you for that song, that's a great song. Okay, today what I'd like to do is more or less take an overview of God's plan and purposes as revealed in the Bible. I'm not going to deal with the first 11 chapters of Genesis, not because they're not important, but because there's so much in them that is embryonic for the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament. What I want to do actually is basically start with Abram. And in the first section I want to go from Abram to the end of the Old Testament, picking out the highlights, if you like, or the themes, the important themes that flow through the Old Testament and which go into the New. I'm not going to deal a lot with the details because a lot of the details are not incidental, but they come within the umbrella of the overall purpose. So if we start off with Abram, who became known as Abram, he really comes on the scene towards the end of Genesis 11. And Sylvia's going to read for us Genesis chapter 12 now, verses 1 to 3. Genesis 12, 1 to 3, please.
The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you."
That's what's known as the Abrahamic covenant. It talks about making Abraham a great nation, and we know that has actually happened. There's two parts to the rest of it. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And that's one part of the Abrahamic blessing, which often gets ignored or confused with the second part. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Those two parts of the Abrahamic covenant actually flow through the rest of the Old Testament and into the New. And they are quite often ignored. Now we get on to Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 to 6, please, Sylvia.
After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness.
So here you had this God talking to Abraham and saying to him, "You will be, father of many nations," and this, that, and the other. And as time went by, his wife passed the age of having children, and he was past it also, and he still had no children. And so basically, he turns to God and says, "What can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." That was his chief steward. Now, Abraham lived at the time when the overruling law of the land was known as the Code of Hammurabi. And under the Code of Hammurabi, if you died without any male offspring, it didn't go to your wife, it didn't go to your daughters, it went to the chief male steward of your household. And so this is what Abraham is talking about. But anyway, being an old man, knowing his wife was past it, God said to him, look at the stars, look at the heavens, count the stars if indeed you can. That's what your offspring is going to be like. And Abraham believed God, and he counted as righteousness to him. And that's a theme also that dominates the rest of the Old Testament, and certainly dominates the New. And it's the passage which Paul picks up a number of times in the New Testament to argue his case, that the Gentiles did not need to be circumcised because Abraham believed God, and he was counted to righteousness before Abraham was circumcised, before the law even came on the scene. Then there's the promise of the land. So God now starts saying to Abraham, "I'm going to give you a land." So let's turn to Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 6, first of all, please.
The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram travelled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land.
So here's the promise of the land. It's not a spiritual land, it's a realistic geographical location. Abraham travelled throughout it. And this promise is repeated again in chapter 13, verses 14 to 17. Okay.
The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can count the dust, then your offspring can be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you."
So he talks about walking through the land of Canaan. He talks about this Canaan. He talks about the places in it. He tells him to go to a high mountain. He tells him to look at the land. And I'm going to give you this land. This is the physical land which he promised him. And basically, this was the land which many people say goes from Dan to Beersheba. Beersheba in the south and Dan in the north. Quite a small piece of land compared to Australia, anyway. Anyway, there's a second promise of the land, and that comes in Genesis chapter 15, verses 17 to 18. Now this promise of this land, I think this is the one which is quite interesting, actually. Right.
When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking brazier with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites and Jebusites."
Pretty good. Perishites. No, there's no Perishites, is there? Perishites, that's right. So if you look at the map, from Dan to Beersheba, well, Beersheba is there, and Dan is up round about by here. Okay? That's the land of Palestine, if you like, the land of Canaan, and things like that. That's the land which the first promise talked about. The first promise talked about that part of the land. And certainly, under the days of King David, they conquered that amount of land, and even more than that amount of land. And of course, Solomon ruled the nations around, because David had conquered those, and acquired taxes from them, which made Solomon's kingdom one of the richest in the earth. But this period, this part of land, from the river of Egypt, which is the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which is up here, that's a massive piece of land. And the people of Israel have never acquired anything anywhere near as that. Now this is one of the promises which many people shudder at, because how on earth is Israel ever going to occupy a massive piece of land like that? Whether it includes all of Saudi Arabia or not, I don't know. I don't know. Or whether it just means this part of land there, that sort of crescent shape, and that may just be a possibility. Because basically they knew in those days that there was nothing over here. That's a desert region, right? So certainly it's talking about the minimum of a huge piece of land that size. And it's never Israel acquired anything like it. Now the land is very much tied up with circumcision. If you'd like to read verses 7 to 11 of chapter 17, please, over there.
I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, as for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you.
Right, so basically you've got this land and this circumcision all tied up together, and they are promises that God actually gave to Abraham for himself and his descendants. I'm going to give you, your descendants, this land as an everlasting covenant, as an everlasting possession. I'm going to make you do circumcision as an everlasting covenant between you. An age-long covenant, an age-long one. And this was repeated then to Isaac, the miraculous child that Sarah and Abram had in their old age. And in chapter 26, verses 1 to 5, please.
Now there was a famine in the land, besides the earlier famine of Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I will tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my commandments, my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws.
So you can see what basically God told to Abraham, he's now actually saying exactly the same to Isaac, and he says exactly the same to Jacob in chapter 28 of Genesis, verses 12 to 14, please.
He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring.
So here you are. This is not an isolated promise. It's a promise which is repeated a number of times to Abraham, it's repeated to Isaac, and it's repeated to Jacob. And it comes and comes and comes. These promises are that you will have a land. You will have a land. The land of Canaan, you're going to have. Walk through it, look at it, this is what you're going to have. Your descendants are going to be numerous as the stars in the sky, the sand of the seashore. You will bring blessings to all nations of the earth. This is what's going to happen to you. And as I say, it's not an isolated promise, it's one that comes on and on and on. The promise about this huge piece of land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, well, that's about the only time it occurs. And, you know, it's very interesting. But that land, you can see why even today that land is still causing a problem, isn't it? That land has always been fought over. Even before Israel went into it, there were peoples in it, there were battles in it, they had to fight for it, they had to fight to retain it, they were conquered and taken away from it, as we've seen they came back to it. Now we need to go on, because basically in the rest of the Pentateuch, through Genesis, through the rest of Genesis, you're basically having the same scenario. It's the development of the family of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 12 tribes, the Joseph, the going into Egypt, and the staying in Egypt for 400 years. And then you have Moses. And Moses comes on the scene, and he is the great leader who God takes and uses and brings the people of Israel out of Egypt after their 400 years in exile there. And Moses is instrumental in what's called the Old Covenant, or the First Covenant. And that comes in Exodus chapter 19. In Exodus 19, verses 3 to 8, we have set out here the terms of this first covenant which God made with the people of Israel. Thank you, sir.
Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on the eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord.
So here you have this setting out of this old covenant, the first covenant. Notice here that they were to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. This is what they were to be. This is how all nations of the earth were to be blessed through them. They were to become a kingdom of priests. A priest mediates basically between God and man. If the whole of Israel is a kingdom of priests, then who are they going to mediate between God and who? The answer is the rest of the nations of the earth. That's what their job was to be. This is how God was working out his plan, if you like, to fulfill his promises to Abraham. Israel were to become a holy nation, a different nation, a special nation. They were to become a kingdom of priests. And that's the problem. In that verse, if you look at it in chapter 9, verse 5, it says, "Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession." It is a conditional covenant. It was conditional upon their obedience. They had to fully obey what God wanted them to fully obey. And if they fully obeyed it, then they would be a holy nation, and then they would be a kingdom of priests. That's what they had to do. Did they do it? Well, Moses took the answer back to the Lord, and when he got back, they were worshipping a golden calf and indulging in all the immorality that they had indulged in Egypt. And Moses, got a bit annoyed about that. I don't blame him. But if there to be a kingdom of priests, the kingdom implies a king. So who's the king? Now, this covenant required Israel to obey the things that the Lord wanted them to obey. And this involved what is known as the law of Moses, or the Mosaic law. Let's have a look at Deuteronomy 28. I don't need to go into the details of all the law. It is in many ways summarized in what we call the Ten Commandments, but as you know, the rest of the law takes the rest of the book of Exodus and the whole of the book of Leviticus. That is the law. It is an incredibly detailed thing. Have you any idea of all the laws there are in Australia? I don't suppose you have. I have no idea of all the laws that there are in Britain. I have no clue. It is a massive document which sets out all the laws that the people of Israel had to obey. You can read them if you like. It's pretty boring, some of it. Right? But it's all there. It is all there, what they had to do. This is what they had to keep if they were to become a kingdom of priests for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, this is what the Lord says to them. Verses 1 to 3, verse. So there.
If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come upon you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You will be blessed in the city and blessed in the country.
And so it goes on. It gives a huge list of blessings that Israel will have if they fully obey the Lord. Right? So he's still on now towards the end of Deuteronomy. He's still starting on the same theme, if you like, as in Genesis chapter 12. It's trying to get Israel now to fully obey. And they were given some guidelines as to whether or not they were obeying to a required standard. If they obeyed to a required standard, they would be blessed in the city and blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, and the crops of your land, and your young livestock. The calves of your herds and the lambs of your flocks. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. It will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. So basically, they would be given certain physical blessings. Basically, they would have good crops. They would have plenty of livestock. They would have good, their children. They would produce lots of children. Because this was all part of the blessing. So, if these things are happening to you, you know you are obeying my law. But what happens if they weren't obeying to the required standard? Let's read verses 15 and 16 of the same chapter, please.
However, if you do not obey the Lord your God, and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. You will be cursed in the city and cursed in the country.
And he goes on, your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed, the fruit of your womb will be cursed, and the crops of your land and the calves of the herds and the lambs of the flocks, you'll be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out, and on it goes. He gives them all the curses. Now, why did the Lord do this? And he tells us why he does it in verses 45 to 49. 45 to 49. Thank you.
All these curses will come upon you. They will pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the commands and decrees he gave you. They will be a sign and a wonder to you and your descendants forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly in the time of prosperity. Therefore, in hunger and thirst, in nakedness and dire poverty, you will serve the enemies the Lord sends against you. He will put an iron yoke on your neck until he has destroyed you. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down, a nation whose language you will not understand.
So here it is. The Lord actually gave the people of Israel these signs, these blessings and these curses as a sign. In other words, if you obey, these good things will happen to you, and if you're not obeying, these bad things will happen to you. Right? Now this is a theme that goes right through the rest of the Old Testament. And it's a promise to the people of Israel. And it's a promise to try to keep them on, if you like, the straight and the narrow. I mean, I suppose if you were like me, sometimes you stop and wonder how good a job I'm doing as a Christian. Would the Lord say to me, well done, good and faithful servant? Or would he have to speak to me like he spoke to Thomas and said, don't be faithless? I mean, I'd like to know sometimes, how am I measuring up? You get reports from school, and you like to see your kids' reports when they come from school. How's the kid doing? You don't expect him to top of the class. You know, but you want to know, is he or she doing a good job? Are they measuring up? And I would like to know that sometimes, but hey, I'm not a person of Israel. I'm not blessed because I'm a good Christian. I'm blessed in all these wonderful things. Basically because I live in a country which is quite prosperous. And many non-Christians are blessed just like I am. So you've got to be very careful that you don't take this blessing and this cursing as a truth for Christians. Because if you do, you end up with what's called the prosperity gospel. And that's very insidious. It may be very nice in America, it may be very nice in the south of England, which is the affluent part of England, it may be very nice in parts of Australia, I'm sure. But you go preach it in the Philippines, you go preach it in Africa, and you will fall flat on your face. Right? It's not a theology which can exist throughout the whole of the world, and it's certainly not a theology which can exist throughout the whole time of Christendom. Because Christians in Christendom in previous ages to ours have been very, very poor. Many of them starved to death and everything. But this is a theme that goes through the Old Testament and it goes into the New. Remember what the Lord said to his disciples, why do you worry about what you eat or drink and what you wear? Seek you first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and these things shall be added unto you. That may be a Christian chorus, but it's not a Christian truth. It's a Jewish truth. It's part of the law of the Old Testament. If you have your spiritual priorities right, you will have food, clothing and drink, and that's what you will get. And this is basically what this nation was promised. Now we might think of this as somewhat incidental. I mean, I don't know about many of you. Have you ever worried about what you're going to eat and drink and what you're going to wear? I'm sure you ladies are worried about what you're going to wear. But I mean, seriously worried about having clothes to wear. I mean, I never have. I mean, I was born in the war in Britain, and I mean, I can remember having bread and dripping to eat, and having things like a sugar sandwich as a treat. But I was never hungry. I never worried about it. I accepted it that that's what food was. You know, I've never been starving in my life. Been hungry a few times when I missed a meal, or when I was sent to bed without my dinner because I'd been naughty as a punishment, but I'd never been starving. You know, so really, this is totally irrelevant for us in Christendom today. But it wasn't irrelevant for the people of Israel at that time throughout the Old Testament and during the time when our Lord was on earth. If you obey, if you seek God's kingdom first and his righteousness, then these things will be added unto you. That's the basis of what the Lord is saying when he speaks to those people there. I can sit down a minute, I think. I rest my wife's legs a moment, right? So we go on to the time of the Judges, which follows follows on. Because after the Pentateuch, we have the time of Joshua, and Joshua wins the battles and takes the people into the Promised Land. And you have the time of the Judges. And if you read the book of the Judges, it really is a demonstration of Deuteronomy chapter 28. You find the people of Israel backsliding, lapsing, and then one of the nations around us comes and overrules them, and they cry unto the Lord, and the Lord raises up a judge, and the judge saves them, and you know, they return to the law, and they get the blessings, and everything goes well for a generation, and the next generation does exactly the same thing. They fall away, they lapse into idolatry and immorality, and the nation around comes and conquers them, and you know, they cry unto the Lord, and the Lord raises up a judge, and so it goes on time after time after time. And it basically, that's what you have. The judges are then eventually superseded by the kings. The kings. Israel wanted some kings. And in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 to 20, we have a very interesting passage. If you'd like to go back to that one. Deuteronomy 17, because this was written quite a number of years before Israel even ever thought of a king. And yet the Lord, in giving Moses the law, knew there was going to come a time when they would want a king. Would you like to read it first, please?
When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us, be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your own brothers. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not a brother Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the priests who are Levites. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his brothers, and turn from the Lord to the right or to the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel.
Thank you. Oh, that's a very full passage, isn't it? Look at it. The king must not be a foreigner. He must be a brother Israelite. Eventually that was narrowed down that he had to be a descendant of David. Now you can understand the hostility of the Jews to the Herods, because the Herods were not Israelites. They were Edomites who had adopted Judaism for basically political reasons. They were proselytes. They weren't even of the tribe of the descendant from David. So you can understand when our Lord stood in front of Herod, he didn't even speak to him. He did not even speak to him. He had absolutely no right whatsoever to be a king over Israel. Totally broke this part of the law. If you notice what he says here, he mustn't have